Hello guys and gals, welcome back, happy new year, hope you all had a good one. I got to chill for a week with family and one of my new toys, the Steam Deck. Very cool piece of kit, making me wish Ableton was Linux compatible and I could get it running on them. But anyway, this week we're returning to Piano House, the final piece of the puzzle. I kind of left you hanging, didn't I, in the last one, regarding rhythm. The subject deserves its own video, and here it is, Piano House Rhythm. Let's go. Okay, so before we fully geek out, let me give you the TLDR. It's actually quite simple. I've just got a single chord here, aim on a 7, and it's as simple as this. When you're on a 16th grid, one bar here, split into 16, you want to be using distances of either 1 apart, like this, we call this an 1/8, or 2 apart, like this. So that'd be 3/16, or what we call a dotted 1/8. Eighths, dotted 1/8. You want to be using a mixture of those, and on average you want to be using more dotted 1/8, like this. So something like this would be a good house rhythm. And the only other rule you really need to pay attention to is to keep the turnaround neat. And what I mean by that is if we just use all these as dotted 1/8 here, you'll hear what happens at the end. Kind of trips over itself a little bit. You can use that, that's fine. But more often than not, you'll hear the end neatened up like this. This is quite a common house rhythm you should recognize. Something like that. Okay, with the basics out of the way, let's get into the who, what, where, why. Okay, so we could spend the next 30 minutes probably bashing out every house rhythm in history right now, especially in a 1-bar format. But you know how we do things on this channel. You're not here just to blindly copy what I'm going to put on the screen. No. We're here to learn things. So why would you choose any rhythm over the other? Well, obviously your piano in your piano house track doesn't exist in a vacuum, so it's going to depend what else is around it. But if you're writing this track from scratch, and at most, for example, you have what I've got here, which is just a drum beat, then pretty much anything goes. Just start by sticking to the basic rules I outlined in the TLDR, and you're good to go. If, however, you want it to synergize better with some other elements around it, for example, a vocal, let me show you a couple of things to listen out for. Okay, so the first thing we need to establish with any vocal or lead melody is the role that it plays in the whole track. Is it the front and center? Is it the focus? Or is it more of what I would call dub decoration? Like a dub vocal would be in a house track where it's just sprinkled in like another instrument. Let's look at some examples from our earlier references. The low stepper track is probably the best example of a dub vocal. Just sprinkled in there occasionally. The second half of the Paul Woolford hook as well is like that. It's just acting like another instrument. That's the approach I took on my track, where I just sprinkled the vocal in. Whereas the other type of vocal, which leans more towards the pop side, is like the DOD record, like I do. You know, it has more of a actual pop structure, like a verse, chorus kind of thing. Same goes for important. So establish what yours is. Is it the focus or is it more dub decoration? If it's the latter, if it's just decoration, then regarding your piano rhythm, pretty much anything goes. Don't worry too much about it. Okay, now if your vocal or lead line is the focus of the track, then we need to establish which type of rhythms it contains. And that can be broken down simply into two categories. Is it square or is it syncopated? Let me give you an example. A square rhythm would be something like this. Whereby if I drop my grid to eighth notes instead of 16ths, they all line up on eighth notes, okay? Or even just on quarter notes. But there's nothing in between those eighth notes. If I moved, say, for example, these here, these would be syncopated notes. So that's square versus syncopated. Let's look at some examples from the references. I've drawn the melodies above the piano MIDI so we can see where they line up. Here's the MK. If I drop our grid to eighths, you can see these are mostly square. In fact, they're all square until this little turn at the end here. And the second half is the same. If you look at the grid as eighth notes, you can see they all line up except one here. This would be our only syncopated note. And here's the DOD. Now again, if I drop to eighth notes on the grid, you see mostly square rhythm. This is our only syncopated push here. So why is that important? Well, with a square vocal, if I was to simply just match it with our piano chord rhythm, even if we were changing chords, this wouldn't be that interesting. Let's add a little melody here just so we can hear it as different from the chords. Not very housey. You could use that if you were deliberately going for square groove in the track, but typically that's not very common. Remember I said in the TLDR we would be using more distances of 2 than 1, more dotted eighths than eighths, and that would sound like this. Not too bad, right? Because the good news is square vocals will fit on pretty much anything. And the reason that works is if you think about your drums, here's your kick drums. Here would be your snare drums. Let's put in some offbeat hi-hats there. Apart from any decoration percussion, your core house groove is going to be square because it's all on eighth notes. Now it turns out any syncopated house rhythms in your piano are just going to bounce nicely off any square vocals or your square core groove. So that sounds fine. And as we saw in MK's One Night, we could choose to emphasize the first two words and then do our syncopations after that. And you can see that sounds fine, even if the vocal doesn't land on most of these. So if the vocal is square rhythms, mostly, then our piano rhythms can be quite independent and still work. And we can choose whether we want to accent or join any significant parts of the top line, like the lyrics, for example. Now, things aren't as easy if we have a lot of syncopation in the melody. Okay, that would be a very syncopated melody. Now listen to what happens if we try to make our piano line independent of that. This is suddenly much messier, much less groovy. So it turns out there is such a thing as too much syncopation. So if you identify that your vocal is syncopated, the first obvious option would be just to join the rhythm. Because if the vocal is syncopated, chances are it works well as a house rhythm already. That would be fine. And then what we can do is the opposite of when we had a square vocal. Instead of picking just a couple where we would accent, we can now pick our battles, as it were, where we want to deviate and bounce off a vocal. Something like that. Or maybe we'd go ahead of this one. Something like that. So if your lead line is important, we need to recognize if it's syncopated or square. Okie dokie. I'm going to leave it there for this week. I do have a lot more to say on rhythm, but I think this episode might be going on a little too long, so we'll save that for a part 2. We're going to move on from the hypothetical examples and dive into some practical ones. I've still got all those vocals I downloaded from Splice for the Chord Any Melody episode. I'd like to show you how I would write rhythms to those. I think that would be really useful. And I have some more advanced tips as well. So come back next week for part 2. In the meantime, if you enjoyed or learned something, you know what to do. Hit the like button or the sub button. Leave me any questions in the comments, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye.